Welcome to week 2 of our study of Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes is a fun book for us to study during this time, suffering from a pandemic in 2020, a lot of economic problems that people are suffering from too, political unrest, things like that. If you haven't had a chance to look at last week's video, Ecclesiastes Part 1, or Week 1 as we might call it, I would encourage you to do that. Ecclesiastes is a book that's really helpful if you get some context for it. And the context is that Ecclesiastes is set within 3 books in the Old Testament referred to as wisdom literature. So including Proverbs and including the book of Job. And we spent some time last week talking about how the 3 work together. And in essence, it's this. Proverbs says if you live in a righteous way, a God-honoring way, God will take care of you. And we see that with blessings in life, and the reward for righteous living, the reward for pursuing the things that we ought to pursue. Ecclesiastes said, that's not always the case. And a proverb, by its own nature, is something that's generally true, but not always. We look specifically at the proverb, train up a child in the way that should go, and when they're old, they will not depart. As one of those proverbs that, it's true that if you train up your children in the right way and lead them along the righteous path, they're more likely as adults to stay in that path and live a righteous life, not depart from it. But I don't think this proverb is saying that if you live your life in such a way that you've trained up a child through the amount of time that you have until they reach adulthood and they begin making their own choices, that now they're trapped in your choices. Because we weren't trapped in our parents' and grandparents' choices, that the choices that are made for us don't often, maybe some restrictions, maybe some opportunities we lose because of how our parents or grandparents live their lives. But our choices are our choices, and so sometimes kids do, if you train them up in the way they should go, sometimes they do depart and lead their own lives. But generally speaking, the proverb is true. Ecclesiastes comes along to, I think, give us the opposite of Proverbs, not the opposite, but the counter-argument to say, while there's benefit in wisdom and living the wise life, it rains on the just and the unjust. It rains on the wise and the foolish. This life can give bad things to good people and good things to bad people. And it may seem random and it may seem meaningless, and it may seem, if you're trying to keep score and figure it all out, it may seem meaningless. And so we're on a journey through the book of Ecclesiastes to figure that out. If you might say, well, I want to understand the book of Proverbs, as a literal book that's promises are true. I understand that, and that's an easy way to do it. But the Bible kind of gives us a clue that it's wisdom literature. And then while we might think that the Bible teaches us that those are things that are always true all the time, if you read the book of Job, it's kind of an example of what happens in Ecclesiastes, where life is more meaningless. In other words, not that it's meaningless in and of itself, but that the meaning is clouded to us, and that's what the word vanity means, clouded or cloudy or smoky, obscuring the meaning, not less necessarily meaning less. But in the book of Job, it basically says, here's Job, he was righteous, but because of a story that Job never heard, of the story of the opposer, Satan, coming to talk to God, God decided to allow bad things to happen to a quote-unquote righteous person. And so, in many ways, Job is the object lesson of all this working out. Job says, wait a minute, I'm following Proverbs, I'm righteous, and God says, yeah, I know, but I've got this bigger calling and you don't know anything about it, but there's a bigger conversation going on. And so, for now, your life is an object lesson to the opposer. We might not like that. It may seem meaningless, it may seem vanity, as the book of Ecclesiastes might say. But what I would say to us as faithful Christians is that not okay for God to use our lives in the way that He sees fit? Do we not want Him to be God over our lives? Much of wisdom literature is you and I making the decision that God is wiser than we are, and that we're pursuing Him and His plan. Even at the beginning of Proverbs, some of my favorite Proverbs, trust in the Lord with all your might. Lean not into your own understanding, in all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will direct your paths. The book of Ecclesiastes says, well, sometimes He might direct you down paths that aren't great for you, but are great for His story, are great for His glory. Is that not okay? Can we not allow God to teach other people through us, use our lives as an object lesson for others who might get to know Him? Certainly we can. So we're going to dive into the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 2. Again, you can go back to the first lesson and catch up some on that. This is not easy stuff. This is not easy teachings, because we don't want to learn it. We want easy lessons. which Proverbs are. We want them to be always true. Hey, if I follow this formula, here's the result I'm guaranteed. I think you and I know that life is not full of guarantees other than the life to come, in which God guarantees us eternal life. In the meantime, God says the world hated him, it will hate us, and so the life that we look forward to, one of comfort and pleasure and all these things, for its own sake is meaningless. And so we're going to dive into the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 2. And the author of Ecclesiastes says, I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure, enjoy yourself. But behold, all this was vanity. So in the first chapter, wisdom for the sake of wisdom is vanity. It's meaningless. It's chasing after the wind, pursuing the wind, trying to get the wind to do what you want it to do. Wind doesn't do that. Wind goes where it wants to. You hear the sound, you know where it's coming from, where it's going, but you don't know where it's going to end up, or even where it originated originally. Where did that particular breath come from? And so what's the object lesson? In many ways, chapter 2 discusses three particular areas where things that are meaningless for their own pursuit. So if wisdom for its own pursuit is meaningless, so are these other things. And it starts off with pleasure or self-indulgence. And here, things like laughter are mad, things like that. But he says, I searched with my heart, verse 3, how to cheer my body with wine, my heart still guiding me with wisdom, how to lay hold of folly till I might see what was good for the children of man to do under heaven during the few days of their life. Under heaven means not including God, for its own sake, under the sun, things that are created, finding meaning in and of themselves among things that are created. You and I, not seeking God, his perspective on wisdom, but seeking our own perspective of wisdom from everything down here, is going to be meaningless. So is pleasure. Seeking pleasure, just looking around under heaven, not including God in this conversation, but for its own sake. And he says it was meaningless. So he did everything within his sight. He didn't turn himself down on anything. We'll read that in a minute. But he says he did all these great works, and he listed houses, planted vineyards, made gardens and parks, planted fruit trees, made pools, forests, all of these kinds of things. Some things that maybe are good and noble, and some things that are definitely not noble and good. Had flocks and herds, and gathered silver and gold and treasures, brought in singers to sing, and many things like that. And so he said, I became great. I had all this stuff I accumulated. I did all this stuff with my own. My wisdom remained with me. Whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. So he says, I just, whatever made me happy, I pursued. Well, I think many people who pursue that kind of life will realize it's kind of an empty life. You get to the end of that and you think, well, I didn't want things that last. I wanted things that were immediate pleasure. And so once they're over, they're over. So what about that? Whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept from my heart no pleasure. My heart found pleasure in my toil. So he says, I worked with my hands. I did everything that I wanted to do. I built, I did all of these things. And he says, there's no value to be gained under the sun. Again, under heaven, of the things created. If you looked at the things created, there's nothing new under the sun. There's nothing new in this realm, and it was vanity. So it was like striving after the wind, nothing to be gained for it. In other words, at the end of pursuing pleasure for the sake of pleasure, there was really no pleasure there. There was a series of experiences that turned out to be empty, because if you have something, what do you want? You want more of it. They asked the top 10 richest people in all the world what they wanted. If I'm not mistaken, 10 out of 10 said more money. Because the richest people in the world, they could have everything they want. And so what do they want? They just wanted more of what they already had. If you were to win the big lottery and have $800 million, what would you want? Well, you buy everything you want. So what will you want? Well, you want that thing that would give you more money. You had $800 million more dollars than you had yesterday. And the only thing in the world that you can want is more of that. And so it's empty. I think you and I would agree with that. So then he says, the vanity of living wisely. And this is a hard section too, but listen to what he says, verse 12. I turned to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can a man do who comes after the king? Only what has already been done. Then I saw that there is more gain in wisdom than in folly, and there's more gain in light than in darkness. So he says, in the midst of meaninglessness, in the midst of cloudiness, I do realize that it's better to live a wise life. That Proverbs are generally true, that if you do the things you're supposed to be doing, then generally your outcome will be better than if you don't. And yet, he says, the wise person has his eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet I perceive that the same event happens to all. So we all live in the same world. So devastation comes, death comes. So we you work hard, I don't work hard. At the end of our lives, we both die. And there's something that doesn't seem fair about that situation to the author of Ecclesiastes. But are we to be worried about fair, or is that a God thing to worry about? If we don't know the whole picture, the thing that strikes me about Job is in the story, we get the story of the opposer coming to God and having this great conversation. And we don't get the story that Job has ever told that conversation exists. So Job is always the person who has less knowledge in the story than those of us who are reading it. You and I, in our lives, are the ones who have less knowledge than the God who is watching us. He knows outcomes that we'll never know. He knows that seeds planted, that we planted, will grow or not grow. And so, in all of that, maybe we just leave fairness up to God. And yet it's hard as individuals, as humans, to say, oh, it's okay whether it's fair or not. No, we want fairness. We want justice. We built our societies around that. I mean, it's sad when they crumble, when justice is not followed through in our society. So then he says, whatever happened to the fool happened to me too. So why have I to be wise? Why in the world do I have to be so very wise? And I said in my heart, this is also vanity. For of the wise as of the fool, there's no enduring remembrance, seeing that in the days to come, all have been long forgotten. So I hated life, because what was done under the sun was grievous for me. So he says the things that we do without God are grievous. They're vanity. They're searching after the wind. Now there's going to be, and I keep reminding us because it's easy to get lost in this, there's going to be a time when we don't do things for the purpose of being under the sun. Okay? We do things for God. And if we do things for God, then they have meaning and they have value. So the last little bit talks specifically about toil, and here's the gerbil wheel where we're all on. We get up, we work, we go to bed, and we get up again, we work, we go to bed, we get up, we work, we go to bed. Typically we gain something for work, and before you know it, we've spent it. It's gone. It's out the door. And so in verse 18 he says, I hated all my toil in which I toil under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who will come after me. This is the reason why it's so ridiculous. I work and I accumulate and I have and I do all of these great things, and then I die and it gets left to somebody else. And they enjoy what I built. They who didn't work for it will enjoy what I worked for. And there's a sense where that's not fair too, and yet that's the system that we have, where the people who save up all their money, if they die, it gets left to people. I knew a couple who saved and scrimped and did with less their entire lives, and had built a little nest egg, and then when both of the parents had passed away, one of the children inherited some of the money, and within a week he was driving a brand new Cadillac. Have fun with that Cadillac, enjoy it. Why could he spend the money so freely? He hadn't spent a lifetime working for it. His parents would have never purchased anything like that, and so it's a big deal. So he hated everything because he was going to leave it to the man who would come after him, and who knows whether that man would be wise or a fool. Yet he'll be the master of all for which I toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. That's interesting. So he said this is also vanity. So he turned and gave his heart up to despair, and gave up over all the toil of his labor under the sun. Because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not. There's wisdom in that, and there's truth in that. And yet, do we not toil then? Do we not build? Do we not try to make the most of our life? If our life might get turned over to somebody with different values? You know, the family business, the dad builds it and the kids come along, or mom builds it and the kids come along, and they don't run it the same way. Maybe it doesn't last 2 generations, just 1.5. So that's the possibility. This is also vanity and great evil. He sees it as a great disadvantage. He doesn't like the idea that somebody else is going to benefit from his work. What has a man from all the toil and striving of his heart, for which he toils beneath the sun? For all his days are full of sorrow, and his work is a vexation. Even in the night, his heart does not rest. This is also vanity. It really bothers him. So he says there's nothing for a better person. He said, eat, drink, and find enjoyment in his toil, though. See, if you work, if you're not so much worried about the achievement for the sake of achievement, but if you find value in working, enjoying the toil, enjoying the work, then it's going to be beneficial. So there's a bit of wisdom in that too. Do the thing you love to do, and you'll never work a day in your life, as the old saying goes. And then also I saw from the hand of God, for apart from him, who could eat and who could have enjoyment? So what does he say? God gives. It's not under the sun, it's above the sun, it's in heaven. So apart from him, who could eat or who could have enjoyment? So he connects it back to God even in chapter 2. For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy, but to the sinner he has given the business of gathering and collecting, only to give to one who pleases God. This is also vanity and striving after the wind. So God gives and God takes away. And even though there's value in that, we have to stop and we have to learn that it is God's choice. How can we say of God, I'll take your gifts from your hand, but if something negative ever happens to me, then I'll curse you and die? You know, that's not the way we live. We live for God, and when the things that we see are blessings from him, he gives to us, we say thank you. When he takes away, sometimes God is just as much in the taking away as he is in the giving. And so I've mentioned this before, but one of the posters I have up here in my office, I'm looking over there because I'm reading it off the wall, but this is what it says: our love for God is tested by the question of whether we seek him or his gifts. Do we wake up in the morning and do we want more of God, or do we wake up in the morning and we just want good things from God? Right? And so Ecclesiastes is saying there's benefit to God. There's benefit for the hand of God, not just in what he gives us, whether it's good or bad. And so it's a legitimate thing to say he gives and takes away. He's the God of the mountain. He's the God of the valley. And sometimes we have just as much benefit from the downs as the ups. And if we identify as that, as an opportunity to learn more, to live more righteous, then when bad things come our way, when pandemics change our lives in a way we don't like, and I don't like it, you don't like it, we don't want to be at home anymore, we want to go out and relive our lives and build back our businesses and do all those things. We don't like the political unrest, we don't like all of these things going on that make us feel unsafe or that make us feel threatened in some way. Maybe God's in all of it. Maybe God uses pandemics. Maybe God uses political unrest. Maybe God uses all of these things. So the biggest thing is for us to say, okay, God, the wisest thing I can do, the beginning of wisdom, is the fear of the Lord. And not being afraid of God, but just saying, I'm going to let you be God. I'm going to see a difference between you being God and me being a faithful follower. And we'll go from there. And so there's a yielding and there's a submission and there's a thing where we just, in the toil of life, we just try to find our joy in what we're doing and try to find our meaning above what we're doing, not in what we're doing for the sake of doing it. Work my whole life and achieved and look at all of this, but then I die and you can't put a U-Haul on the back of a hearse. They say that. You can't take it with you. And so it gets left to somebody else who's going to do with it what they want, maybe something that would make you incredibly not proud. And you can get bogged down by all of that, or you can just say, my meaning is up there. My enjoyment's down here, and here's God, and here's me, and I'm just going to leave it that way. It's the beginning of wisdom. And it's the beginning of contentment, too, because you can sit around and think about how unfair life is and get really depressed, throw yourself a pity party, and live in books like Ecclesiastes and Lamentations and some of the poems where David was not very happy. And that's a part of life, but the highs are also part of life, too. Okay? So next week we'll be back, chapter 3. You can read that ahead of time if you want. Otherwise, I'll see you then, and God bless you.